What if I told you that your constant need to socialize, to be around people, to stay connected might actually be the biggest waste of your time? What if, instead of making you more fulfilled, your social life is making you more distracted, more anxious, and further away from who you truly are? And what if one of the most misunderstood philosophers in history, Arthur Schopenhauer, was right all along? Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait, are you telling me I shouldn't have friends? That being social is useless? No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying something much deeper. I'm asking you to challenge one of the core assumptions of modern life, that being surrounded by people, constantly talking, constantly interacting, constantly being busy with others, is inherently good, because Schopenhauer didn't think so. In fact, he believes that most of human suffering, most of our confusion, most of our wasted potential comes from our inability to be alone. Let's start with a brutal question. When was the last time you spent an entire day completely by yourself and felt completely at peace? Not entertained, not distracted, not numbed out, just you, with yourself, in your own presence. Most people can't do it. And that's the problem. We live in a world where solitude is viewed as a punishment, not a privilege, where social status is measured in likes, followers, and group chats, where silence is awkward and being alone is suspicious. But here's where Schopenhauer flips the script. He believed that the highest form of existence, the most authentic, most meaningful life, is found not in the crowd, but away from it.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
He wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone, and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom, for it is only when he is alone that he is really free." Let that sink in. He's saying that every time you avoid being alone, every time you fill up your calendar with parties, coffee dates, networking events, and endless social obligations, you might be running away from the one relationship that matters most, the one with yourself. And here's the twist. That endless socializing, it's not making you more connected, it's making you more fragmented. Because when you're always with others, you're constantly adjusting, you're shaping yourself to fit the room, you're managing impressions, you're performing. And the more you perform, the more you forget who you are without the performance. It's like this. Imagine wearing a mask for so long that you forget there's even a face underneath. You smile, you nod, you talk about the weather, your job, your weekend, but somewhere deep down there's a quiet voice asking, is this really me? Or have I just become a reflection of other people's expectations? Schopenhauer would say that most people never even ask that question because they're too busy being busy. But here's where it gets even more intense. He didn't just think social life was a distraction, he thought it was dangerous. Why? Because it seduces us into mediocrity. When you're always around others, you start to think like others. You want what they want. You fear what they fear. You adopt the herd mentality. You lose your edge. You stop thinking independently. And for Schopenhauer, that was the death of genius. He believed that true insight, true originality, true depth comes only in solitude. Because in solitude, there's no one to impress, no one to validate you, no one to interrupt your thoughts, just you and truth. Let me ask you something. Do you actually know what you think? Or have you just absorbed the opinions of everyone around you? Because when you're constantly in conversation, constantly consuming content, constantly reacting to social energy, you don't have time to think your own thoughts. You're not reflecting, you're echoing. And Schopenhauer would argue that echoing is the enemy of enlightenment. Now, this might sound extreme, and in a way it is. Schopenhauer was a bit of a loner. He believed that most people were so caught up in petty desires and shallow distractions that being around them was more harmful than helpful. And you know what? He might have been right. Because look around you. How many people do you know who are truly self-aware? How many people do you know who have depth? Not surface-level charm, not social intelligence, I mean real depth. The kind that comes from years of self-examination, of wrestling with big questions, of confronting their own flaws without numbing or deflecting. That kind of person is rare. And one reason they're so rare? Because we've designed a society that rewards noise and punishes silence. We celebrate extroversion, we glorify busyness, we equate popularity with value. But Schopenhauer flips the metric. He says, the more time you spend alone, the more likely you are to become someone worth knowing. Because solitude is where the inner work happens. It's where you build your character. It's where you discover your real values, not the ones you inherited from your culture or your friends, but the ones your soul speaks in whispers when the world turns down its volume. And here's the kicker. When you start spending more time alone, not escaping but engaging with yourself, you start to become immune to social pressure. You stop needing approval. You stop chasing attention. You stop fearing rejection. Because you've already found something deeper, self-respect. You no longer need the crowd to tell you who you are. You know who you are. And that knowledge makes you dangerous in the best possible way. It makes you unshakable. Now, let's talk about the practical side. I'm not suggesting you become a hermit and never talk to anyone again. That's not the point. The point is to become selective, to treat your time and attention like sacred currency. Start asking, does this social interaction nourish me or drain me? Am I spending time with people who elevate my thinking or just fill the silence? Do I walk away from these conversations feeling more like myself or less? These questions are your compass. Because not all social life is bad, but mindless social life is, and most of us are drowning in it. We go to events we don't care about, spend time with people we barely like, and maintain relationships out of authenticity. Why? Because we're afraid of what happens when we stop. We're afraid of being alone. But that fear is the doorway. Schopenhauer believed that once you walk through it, once you embrace solitude instead of resisting it, you unlock something extraordinary. You begin to live not as a social mirror, but as a sovereign mind. And that is rare, that is powerful, that is free. In the next part of this journey, we're going to dive deeper into Schopenhauer's philosophy of the inner world. Why the depth of your internal life determines everything about your external experience, and how to build the kind of inner richness that makes superficial social life unnecessary. We'll explore how solitude can become a superpower, not just for survival, but for radical transformation. Let's begin with a question that very few people have the courage to ask themselves. If everything external was taken away, your friends, your followers, your job, your family, what would be left of you? Would there still be a self, or just a void? This is the question Schopenhauer forces us to confront, because he didn't believe that the self is found in relationships, achievements, or social validation. He believed it is found in depth, and depth comes only from solitude. Serious, intentional solitude. Most of us build our identities out of mirrors. We look at how others respond to us and we piece together a self from their reactions. If they laugh, we're funny. If they praise us, we're good. If they ignore us, we're worthless. But Schopenhauer says, that's not a self. That's a performance. And performances don't last. What lasts is what you build inside when no one is watching, when no one is clapping, when there's no audience to impress. That's your inner fortress. And if you don't have one, you'll be at the mercy of every mood, every comment, every social wind that blows through your life. So how do you build it? How do you practice solitude in a way that doesn't just feel like loneliness? First, we need to make a distinction. Loneliness is the absence of others. Solitude is the presence of yourself. Loneliness makes you feel hollow. Solitude makes you feel whole. But only if you know how to handle it, because solitude is not passive. It's not just being alone. It's active engagement with your own mind. It's reading, writing, meditating, walking, thinking deeply without distraction, without interruption, without the need to report it on social media. It's building a relationship with your thoughts so strong that you no longer need constant noise to feel real. And Schopenhauer believed that this kind of solitude was not just beneficial, it was essential. He said, "Ordinary people think merely how they shall spend their time. A man of talent tries to use it." Social life for him was the playground of the shallow. The deeper your thoughts, the more you would need silence, the more you would crave it. Because here's the secret. Most people avoid solitude because they're terrified of what they'll find. When you take away the noise, the distractions, the performance, what's left? Insecurity, anger, regret? The fear that maybe, just maybe, you've never actually lived your own life. That's why social life becomes a mask, a constant stream of interaction that keeps you from looking in the mirror. But the mirror is where the transformation begins. When you sit in silence long enough, your mind stops spinning, your defenses drop, and slowly, painfully, beautifully, you begin to meet yourself. Not the you constructed for the world, the real you. The you that has been buried under years of pretending. The you that knows what you actually want, what you truly believe, what you deeply fear. And once you meet that version of yourself, once you start building that inner fortress, you no longer need social life. You choose it intentionally, selectively. You stop chasing endless connection. You start trying to impress people. You start trying to understand them. You stop fearing solitude. You start protecting it. Because you realize solitude is not a lack, it's a luxury. It's a space where your mind can breathe, where you can hear the faint voice of your intuition, where you can return to the truth when the world makes you forget. Let me ask you something now, and answer it honestly. How often do you spend time with yourself? Not to improve, not to achieve, not to be productive, but just to be. Most people can't even sit in silence for 5 minutes without checking their phone. We've lost the ability to be with ourselves, and that loss is costing us everything. It's costing us clarity, it's costing us integrity, it's costing us power. Because when you don't know yourself deeply, When you've never spent time alone long enough to hear your own thoughts, you become easy to manipulate. You believe what others believe, you want what others want, you follow the herd. And Schopenhauer, he didn't just warn us about this, he raged against it. He believed that only a few people would ever rise above the herd. Only a few would ever dare to live from the inside out. Only a few would ever have the courage to think deeply, feel deeply, live deeply. Because only a few would ever embrace solitude. He compared the masses to sheep, docile, reactive, indistinguishable. But the philosopher, the seeker, the real human being, they were the wolves. Alone, alert, independent, not because they hated people, but because they refused to be defined by them. So here's the challenge. Can you become the kind of person who doesn't need social life to feel alive? Can you create a world within yourself so rich, so full, so meaningful that anything outside of it is just a bonus, not a necessity? That's the path Schopenhauer invites us to walk. It's not an easy path. It requires discipline, it requires discomfort, it requires confronting the parts of yourself you've been avoiding for years. But on the other side, freedom, power, peace, the kind of peace that doesn't come from being liked or followed or invited, the kind of peace that comes from knowing, I am whole, I am enough, I am not afraid of my own mind. And once you reach that place, you become unstoppable, because nothing external can shake you, not rejection, not solitude, not silence. You've built something the world can't touch, a fortress made not of stone, but of self. In the final part of this journey, we'll explore the ultimate payoff of Schopenhauer's philosophy, how rejecting shallow social life and embracing solitude doesn't just make you stronger, it allows you to live a life of radical clarity, creativity, and authenticity. We'll uncover how solitude is the birthplace of genius, and why the greatest thinkers, artists, and visionaries in history all had one thing in common: they knew how to be alone. What if I told you that the greatest minds in history, those who shaped art, science, philosophy, and the very way we understand reality, had one thing in common? They weren't popular. They weren't constantly surrounded by friends. They weren't at every party or endlessly networking. They were alone. And not just physically alone, but mentally, spiritually, intellectually detached from the noise of the crowd. They didn't avoid society because they hated people. They avoided it because they saw what it did to the mind. It dulled it. It flattened it. It pulled them away from the inner world where truth lives. Schopenhauer understood this better than almost anyone. He believed that solitude is not just a condition for thinking, it's the origin of genius. Because genius requires depth, and depth requires silence, and silence is impossible when you're always surrounded by talking heads. He wrote, "The more a man has in himself, the less he will need from the outside, and the less others can be to him." The philosopher is like a deep well, not a babbling brook. Let's unpack that. A deep well doesn't advertise itself. It doesn't make noise, it just is. Still, quiet, profound. But if you drop a bucket into it, what you pull up can change your life. That's the mind you want to build. A reservoir of thought that's not constantly spilling out onto the social stage, but gathering strength in the unseen depths. Let me ask you something personal. Have you ever had a moment alone When a thought came to you so clearly, so powerfully, that it felt like it didn't come from you, but through you. That's not a hallucination. That's your genius surfacing, and it only happens in solitude. Every great idea, every revolutionary insight, every philosophical breakthrough, it all starts in that sacred space where the world is quiet and the mind is loud. Think about it. Nietzsche walked alone in the Alps for hours every day, composing his most profound works in his head before writing them down. Kant had the same daily walk, alone, same time, same route, for decades. Beethoven? Deaf, isolated, obsessed with the music inside his own mind. Virginia Woolf said, "A woman needs a room of her own to write." These weren't quirks, they were requirements. Because the deeper you go into your own consciousness, the more original your thoughts become. You stop repeating what others say, you stop chasing trends, you stop needing permission to think differently. Instead, you begin to generate. You generate insight, you generate clarity, you generate meaning. And here's the truth Schopenhauer knew and most people don't want to hear. You cannot become truly original while constantly being social. Why? Because social life is mimicry. It's adaptation. It's compromise. Not always, but mostly. You adjust your tone, you manage your image, you say what's acceptable. But genius is unacceptable, it's disruptive, it's strange, it's often antisocial by nature, and if you don't have the solitude to let that weird, raw, brilliant part of you come forward, you'll live your whole life as a copy of someone else's expectations. That's the real tragedy, not that we're lonely, but that we're never alone enough to become ourselves. So how do we fix this? How do we live in a world obsessed with connection and still develop solitude as a superpower? You start small. You block off time each day to be unreachable. No phone, no input, just you and your mind. At first it might feel empty, but that emptiness is sacred. It's the silence before the insight. The space before the spark. You'll begin to notice something strange. You start coming up with ideas that feel more like you. Not recycled, not performed, not curated. Authentic. You'll begin to feel that inner compass getting stronger. You'll feel less pulled by what everyone else thinks. You'll stop asking for directions and start making maps. And eventually, you'll wake up one morning and realize you don't need the noise anymore because you've found something deeper inside you, something so powerful, so you, that no amount of social approval could ever replace it. That's what Schopenhauer was trying to teach us, that the greatest life isn't the one filled with constant interaction. It's the one overflowing with internal richness. Because when your mind becomes a place of wonder, curiosity, and depth, what happens outside of you becomes secondary. And ironically, that's when you become most valuable to others. Because people are starving for depth. They're drowning in small talk. They're aching for someone who's not just another echo, but a source. You become a source of insight, of clarity, of truth, because you dared to be alone. You chose silence over noise, solitude over distraction, depth over popularity, and that choice, that's the choice that changes your life. So here's my final challenge to you. Can you take one day, just one, and treat your solitude like it matters more than your social life? Can you unplug? Can you walk alone? Can you listen not to others but to yourself? If you can do that even once, you'll begin to feel the shift. You'll begin to build the inner world Schopenhauer admired. You'll begin to understand what it means to be free. And when that happens, you'll never waste your time with shallow social life again, because you'll know the greatest conversations you'll ever have are the ones you have with your own mind.